All right, so the purpose of this video is just to go over looking at a graph of sine or cosine function, writing the equation for it. All right, so let me just go back over the fact that, again, sine and cosine are periodic functions. Okay, once we are set with identifying one period of the sine or the cosine graph, that pattern just continues to repeat. The one thing that I want to focus on is the fact that if I'm just looking at a period between 0 and 2 pi, my sine function is going to start at the point 0, 0, and my cosine function starts at the point 0, 1. So I'm going to focus specifically on those 2 points when I go to determine what my phase shift is, okay, what my horizontal translation is. And then let me remind you, the domain of the sine and cosine function are all real numbers, and my range is, all my outputs have to be between -1 and +1. All right, so state two possible equations, one sine, one cosine for the periodic function graph below. And we did this in both of our classes. All right, my vertical shift. So my vertical shift, my maximum y value is 5. My minimum y value is -5 divided by 2. So my midline, my value of k is 0. All right, amplitude, A is max minus my min divided by 2. So this gives me 10 divided by 2. So A has a value of 5. All right, so now the period, you can look at several different places for this. I want, right, because I know what a period of the graph looks like. So I have to trace one cycle of either the sine or the cosine function to determine the period. So increase, decrease, increase, end. Okay, so when I look, I started at 0, I ended at pi. So what's my period? My period is pi. All right, what if I wanted to look elsewhere? What if I started down here? All right, so I'm going to increase, and then I'm going to decrease, and I end at this point. So that's one cycle of the cosine function. So how do I determine my period? It'll be the absolute value. Look at my x-axis, and I'll come over here so you can see it a little bit bigger. From here to here is pi units, and I'm going pi units over 1, 2, 3, 4 equal intervals. So what is each increment? My units here are units of pi over 4. Pi over 4, pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, and then pi. And I would do the same moving to the left. So my increment, how much I'm moving, how much each unit is worth, is pi over 4. So when I look at this, this is x equals 3 pi over 4. This would be equal to x is 7 pi over 4, because I'm pi over 4 units less than 2 pi. So when I subtract my start and my end values, I verify that the period is equal to pi. Okay, so period equals 2 pi divided by b. Multiply both sides of this equation by b, and we get a b value of 2. Okay, so now k is 0, a is 5, b is 2. Those things don't change. What changes is where our graph starts. My sine function starts at the midline. Okay, so if I start here, and remember what I said at the beginning of the video, it's all about where the starting point is. This value, this point is at 0, 0. The exact same point as the parent function of sine. So when I look to this graph, if I'm going to write the equation for a sine function, my c value is 0. There's no phase shift. So when I go to plug in my values, y equals a times sine of b times x. C is 0, and K is 0. So I don't need to add anything else there. This is it. If when I finish, if I have time, I'll come back and I'll try and write other equations for these graphs because an infinite amount exists. Okay, cosine starts at my max or my min. So if I look at my maximum here, I'm just going to pick a point to start at. I'm going to start here. Y equals A, cosine B. Now what's happening? So back to my parent function, I had said to you that your parent function for cosine starts at the point 0, 1. So when I look at this point here, how far have I moved from this point on the y-axis? Now I know that point is not 0, 1, but that's because I changed the height of my function. So from my parent function to that point, how far have I moved? I've moved pi over 4 units to the right. So my C value, my phase shift, is pi over 4 to the right. How does that correspond to my equation? I have to subtract the value of C. So that is just one possible equation for cosine out of literally an infinite amount. Okay, let's look at this one. So the one thing that we had talked about in class here, here's my, or maybe we didn't talk about, your height has to be symmetrical. So if I look, here's y is equal to 1. To get down to my x-axis, that I move down 1 unit. So then above the midline, I have to move up 1 unit. So it verifies, even though it's not written, that my y value is equal to 2. All right, so my maximum plus minimum divided by 2. My k value is 1. That verifies our dotted line here. Amplitude, A equals max minus min over 2. So my A value is 1. That verifies what I wrote here, right? My height from my midline to my max or my min is 1 unit. Now, if you notice the scale, I'll just come over here. My x-axis, it's still increments of pi over 4. So if I trace 1, there's my sine graph. I start at pi over 2 and I end at 3 pi over 2. Or maybe I want to look at my cosine. So if I start at my max and then I end at my maximum, all right, we're going to show that both are the same. So from my sine curve, I said I started at pi over 2 and I ended at 3 pi over 2. That tells me my period's pi. The cosine graph, I started at 3 pi over 4. What's pi over 4 units bigger than 3 pi over 2? Okay, because that's what we have to be thinking about. That's 7 pi over 4, and it verifies again that the period would be equal to pi. So this happens to have the same period as the previous example, which would make B again equal to 2. Okay, so K is equal to 1, A is equal to 1, B is equal to 2. So even before I begin, I already have a lot of information here. Now I sort of cheated, but hopefully you're seeing from this graph, there's nothing on the y-axis. So I know a phase shift has to happen for both of them. All right, so for my sine function starts here on the y-axis. How far have I moved over? I've moved to the right pi over 2, and I've moved up 1. Okay, we already verified the plus 1. That's my k value. So how much was my phase shift? I moved pi over 2 units to the right. So how do I represent that in my equation? I have to subtract my c value. There's my sine equation. Okay, Now for the graph of cosine starts up at the maximum point. So how far did I move to get to that point? Now I have moved over 3 pi over 4. So now if my equation is going to be for a cosine graph, my C value is now equal to 3 pi over 4. Okay? If I move to the right 3 pi over 4, then I represent that with a minus 3 pi over 4. K, A, and B are the same no matter what. It's the phase shift, the horizontal shift that's going to be different. For the sine graph, you're looking how far have I moved from 0, 1. Excuse me, 0, 0, and I probably should put this here. For the cosine graph, I'm saying how far have I moved from 0, 1. So the sine goes from the origin, and the cosine goes from the point 0, 1. I'm still moving to the right 3 pi over 4, and I'm moving up 1. But that plus 1 was verified when we found the value of K. All right, I'm going to try and get to this last example. All right, so K, just so you can, this is the point -1.5, comma 0. This is the point 1.5, comma -4. Max, oops, put those in the right order. Max plus min all over 2. I get a midline of y is equal to -2. So I'm going to sketch that in. Amplitude, max minus my min divided by 2. A is equal to +2. That makes sense. If I go up 2 units or down 2 units from my midline, I get to my max and my min. Okay, now the period. Now what I did for this, in class we talked about it, but I want to, let me look from here to here. So if I start at the maximum point, then I'm looking to get back to my maximum. Well, if I go from max to min, let me go back to my parent. If I go from max to min, that's half of a period. So when I look at, I want you to go from defining feature to defining feature to get from my maximum. So half of my period is from -1.5 to 1.5. So half of it is a distance of 3 units. So what would my period be equal to? It would be a total of 6 units. So when I come back here and I attempt to solve for B, pause the video and verify for yourself that you get B is equal to pi over 3. I'm going to run out of time. I didn't want to do that. Okay, so for sine, if I start at my midline, here's my midline. I drew it in. So from 0, 0, because that's where sine starts, I've moved to the left 3 units and I've moved down 2 units. Yep, I already know K is equal to -2, A is equal to 2, and B is equal to pi over 3. So what is my C value for my cosine graph? My C value, I moved to the left 3. Okay. Now for cosine, cosine starts at my max and my min. So when I look at my cosine, how have I moved? Remember, this was my first from 0, 1. I've moved to the left 1.5. Okay. Oh, all right. Let me take this out. I've moved from the left 1.5. So what's my C value if I'm writing my cosine function? I've moved to the left 1.5.